Yes, I will start again. Welcome to this session at the Paris Peace Forum titled The Net Zero Space Initiative, Preserving Earth's Orbital Environment for All. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today. My name is Tanja MASSON-ZWAAN from the International Institute of Air and Space Law at Leiden University. I am joined here by Mr. Michel Azibert from Eutelsat, Deputy CEO, and we have several other panelists who are joining us today in virtual mode. We are going to discuss today the launch of a declaration called the Net Zero Space Initiative. This is a declaration in which several signatories, which we are announcing today, are committing to preserving outer space for future generations, for sustainability and for safety. Outer space is very strategically important for all of us here on Earth. And it is becoming congested and contested. And we need to take action to keep it accessible for all humankind. This is one of the principles that has been established in a United Nations treaty, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which says that outer space is free for use and exploration by all countries on a basis of equality, and that use and exploration of outer space are the province of all humankind. And to ensure that that province of all humankind can be preserved also for future generations, it's very important that we take action now. And that is why I'm very happy to have several actors with me here today to discuss their commitment to this initiative, the Net Zero Space Initiative. Before I give the floor to our first panelist, I would like to just mention the entities that are signing up to this initiative today. We have Arianespace, we have Astroscale, we have CGSTL, we have CNES, the French Space Agency, we have Eutelsat, we have the EU SST, Space, the International Institute of Air and Space Law, Planet, Share My Space, and SpaceAble. And these entities are committing today, and we have several of them with us to explain how their commitment will be concretely applied, and they will enlighten us on their initiatives. First of all, however, I would like to give the floor to the director of the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs in Vienna, Ms. Simonetta Di Pippo, who will explain to us why it is so important to do this and what the role of the United Nations is as a multilateral forum where all states come together to agree on the rules of the road. Ms. Di Pippo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor MASSON-ZWAAN. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you today. Well, I would like to underline the fact that space activities really have reshaped human society into a modern, globalized, and connected civilization. The fast developments in the space sector we see today are therefore very encouraging on one side and also exciting on the other side, because they're catalyzing the growth of space economy, empowering our efforts in creating a sustainable future on Earth. Well, for sure, we must remain vigilant. With new opportunities, also challenges arise. The increasing density of objects across different orbits raises concerns in the space community, especially in relation to the growing population of space debris. We are treading on dangerous grounds with the likelihood of collisions on the rise. In the worst case scenario, near-Earth environment, which is a finite resource, could be rendered unusable for generations. Well, we as the international space community, we have the obligation to preserve space safe, secure, and sustainable in the interest of all humanity. And fortunately, we see that commitment. The sustainable use of outer space is a priority for the United Nations and its member states. And this is also clear by the discussions and outcomes of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, as well as across events organized by the Office for Outer Space Affairs. The Unanimous adoption of the guidelines for the long-term sustainability of outer space activities at COPUOS back in 2019 is the best testimony. And the process has recently gotten an additional boost at the highest political level in the UN. In the report on our common agenda, UN Secretary General shared concerns about space debris and called for the creation of a multi-stakeholder dialogue to move towards a global system to coordinate space traffic and agree on principles for the future governance of outer space activities. Efforts in this arena will determine our capacity to protect the Earth orbital environment. We can, and I am fully convinced we will, succeed in creating tailored and effective rules of the orbit, building on the current frameworks. And to get there, reinforced cooperation and multilateral action are absolutely imperative. Well, the Net Zero Space Declaration presented today clearly goes in this direction. By complementing existing endeavors, this declaration represents a valuable international effort to increase awareness on such important issue and contribute to highlighting the importance of sustainable space environment. So I believe it's quite a good document, also a good effort that we all together put on this, and I am sure this is only the first step. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Di Pippo, for those encouraging words and for the appreciation of your office for this initiative, which is very welcome. Next, I'm going to give the floor to Michel Azibert, who is the Deputy CEO of Eutelsat, which is one of the largest European satellite operators, operating a number of satellites for communication purposes. And Mr. Azibert, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tanja. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Eutelsat is proud to have worked with the Paris Peace Forum on this critical topic of space sustainability, and we are proud to support the Net Zero Space Initiative. For a global satellite operator like Eutelsat, it is absolutely vital to preserve a safe and sustainable space environment. Under the laws of physics, interactions in the outer space between the Earth, several thousands of satellites and several millions of debris are extremely complex, but risks are statistically predictable. Against the background of the promise of more and more, bigger and bigger satellite constellations, the risk of a progressive congestion of orbit space is becoming real. As a consequence, the risk of accidents, small or big, is significantly increasing. We should anticipate, measure, model, monitor and contain this risk. For this purpose, the Net Zero Space Declaration of today reminds us that, just like in the field of climate change, we cannot hope that technology alone, talking here about artificial intelligence and active debris removal, will be sufficient to manage and to overcome this situation. We should prevent before we remediate. This is why we like the fact that the Net Zero Space Initiative emphasizes the utmost importance of a carefully planned approach to space operation from their conception phase, and subsequently, of course, of adopting responsible behaviors and technology tools to mitigate the impact of such activities. This is our dual-track approach at Eutelsat, the one we commit to uphold as we pledge today our support to the initiative, planning and executing our space operations with a view to maintaining sustainability of outer space. It was 16 years ago, in 2005, that Eutelsat established its own space debris mitigation plan, covering in particular station-keeping maneuvers, satellite repositioning, inclined orbit operations, and end-of-life operations. Our mitigation plan is based on international and European guidelines. Of course, Eutelsat also fully respects the criteria defined by the French Space Operations Act, the LOS, which is one of the most stringent national laws currently in force. We work actively with CNES on keeping the LOS permanently up to the challenge. Our mitigation plan for debris sets out requirements designed to improve end-of-life and passivation operations, as well as minimize collision risk. These requirements are even more demanding than those contained in the regulation applicable to our company. To date, Eutelsat has reorbited and passivated 23 satellites that have reached end of life with a 95% success rate, significantly outperforming the industry standards. One final comment about today's initiative. A multi-stakeholder approach like the one practiced by the Paris Peace Forum is very good to raise awareness and to create momentum. I commend once again the PPF for taking this initiative. But the very specific nature of outer space from a legal perspective must not be forgotten. Ultimately, only states are deemed liable for what happens in outer space under international law, and they have an obligation to regulate the activities of their private actors. Some may do it properly, reasonably, some may not. This is where we hope and we trust that the Net Zero Space Initiative of today will trigger political and legal action from states to make sure that all users of space are held accountable at the same level for the benefit of us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel. And it's good to see that industry is even taking steps that go beyond what is required from them under legislation. And that is, of course, also because industry realizes that it is in your own best interest to keep space accessible and for your own activities. Next, I'm going to give the floor to Chris BLACKERBY from Astroscale. He is the Chief Operating Officer and he's joining us virtually, and he's going to tell us what Astroscale's plans are. And Chris, you have the floor.
Tanja, thank you very much. I think it's no secret to all of us on this panel that there's a growing environmental crisis in Earth's orbit. For the first 60 years of the space age, we've realized incredible benefits from satellites. We rely on the data we get from satellites every day to live our lives, to understand climate, to help underserved communities. We need them. But in doing this, we have created an incredible level of risk. Technical risk, environmental risk, and economic risk by cultivating a throwaway culture. A culture where assets in space are used and abandoned and not repaired and removed. So it's really time to take that next leap in utilizing space to create a renewable orbital environment. We're at the cusp of a technological and economic breakthrough in the orbital economy. It was just referenced how many new satellites are being launched. We see new players coming in forms of governments and institutions and universities and small companies that are adding more and more assets into space that are going to continue to provide us with these incredible benefits, but is going to continue to add to this risk. These Earth orbits are a non-renewable natural resource. And if we don't take action to address it, we're going to get to the point where it's not usable. And so Astroscale is proud to support this initiative, and we are committed to taking action to help mitigate debris, to mitigate future debris, to remove current debris, and to develop the technologies that are going to lead to a broader servicing community in space. It's really not just about debris removal and mitigation. It's about creating the technologies that leads to servicing in space, which is what's really going to expand this orbital economy and keep it sustainable. So here at Astroscale, we're focused on the technical and the policy and the economic steps to make this happen. On the technical side, we're developing capabilities to locate and dock with debris in orbit and remove it from orbit, reducing that risk. We currently have a mission in orbit, ELSA-D, which is demonstrating these capabilities of finding and removing a piece of debris. And this is just the first mission. We're just getting started in showing that we have the technical capabilities to do this. We have multiple missions coming up that will demonstrate multiple debris removal, being able to grab a piece of debris and bring it out of the way and then going to get another piece. We're developing those capabilities. We're developing the capabilities to service satellites in the geo orbit so we can make sure that those assets are maintained and that they don't fail. And we're developing the capabilities to find current pieces of debris as well as prepare future satellites for servicing. But it's not just a technical problem, as was just addressed. This is a policy problem. And we are active in the international arena as well as in domestic discussions in all of our offices in Japan, UK, Israel, the United States, to discuss this from a domestic perspective, but also from a global, international, multilateral perspective. And finally, we're focused on the economic aspect of this. This isn't just needs to be a stick from policymakers to make people recognize that this is a good thing to do. We need to show that there's a benefit to the commercial community to take on satellite servicing and debris removal. So we are excited to be an initial signatory here of the Net Zero Space Initiative, and are proud to see the Paris Peace Forum really grab this initiative and bring it to a broader community. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And it's very exciting what your company is doing in really trying to clean up space, the space sweepers. I think I remember seeing that in one of the early years as your slogan. And that is, of course, very important. And it's very interesting. It's also indeed, apart from the technology, it is also legally challenging because, of course, if you can grab a piece of debris, you could also grab a piece of sensitive technology, but perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit more in the discussion on how we can ensure that we have a safe regulatory environment to facilitate that, because of course recycling and repairing is essential in not having to launch new satellites all the time when something breaks up at thousands of kilometers above our heads. I'm going to go to our next panelist, who is Will Marshall. I don't see him here on the screen yet, but I assume Will is with us. Yes, I see him on the screen above me. Hi, Will. So Will is a co-founder. Will Marshall is the co-founder and CEO of Planet, which is a company that is currently operating hundreds of very small satellites that provide global coverage of our planet every day. And that is extremely exciting, and it's a beautiful company, and it is really democratizing space as we know it, very much so compared to the early days when it was the era of the space powers. This is really an example of a very successful startup company that has democratized space. So and they're also very climate conscious. I believe, Will, you just came or are still perhaps at COP26. So we're excited to hear what your commitment is to the Net Zero Space Initiative. Will, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for having us here today. Look, fundamentally, I did just come from COP. That's true, and I, a bit like climate change, of course, the debris challenge in outer space. The sooner you nip it in the bud, the better. And we should learn some lessons, society could, for dealing with these problems sooner. At Planet, we strongly support the long-term sustainability of outer space for all actors, as is called for in this Net Zero Space Declaration. Planet, really cares about these issues. As you say, our dedication is using Earth observation to help us with the challenges here on the Earth. We also care about the environmental challenges in space. And in fact, I myself did several years of research in the debris problem back when I was at NASA before we started Planet. And I'm personally dedicated to this, as well as we are as a company. We specifically fly our satellites very low, at 400 to 500 kilometers altitude, to ensure that they stay out of the way of the rising challenge of space debris. Because when you keep them in low Earth orbits, there's a natural effect of the atmosphere in those orbits to to bring the satellites down quickly after the end of life, or if they fail for any reason. And so it's self-cleaning in those very low orbits, like low Earth orbit. We also do various operational measures to reduce the probability of collisions. Now, I think there's three things that need to be done that are important for the long-term sustainability of the space environment. The first is that we need all the space actors to be responsible, especially those in charge of large constellations of satellites. Responsible actors like end of life, like our colleagues on this panel were talking about, end of life operations, pacification, staying under the 25-year rule, and so on. Secondly, we do need new laws and rules, and I mean, in particular, I want to underscore the word laws. And there are critical areas where we need new regulation, and I think laws are the more appropriate one. Two that are upcoming. One is the fact that we have mega constellations going up into higher altitudes. Whilst they may carry propulsion, the problem is when you get to thousands or tens of thousands of satellites even in higher low Earth orbits, even if 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100 propulsion systems fail, you have a significant debris add. So our current systems of, if you like, basic rules for actors are not sufficient for this new mega constellation environment, especially if they're going higher altitude. Again, we keep ours very low, so they don't contribute to that. The second is anti-satellites. We have to prohibit anti-satellites. We are still having countries intentionally blowing up satellites. That is not good for anyone. We've made several statements about this, but the Indians, the Americans, and the Chinese have all recently blown up satellites, and that is not acceptable. The majority of the objects in space are not the satellites. We have about 3,000 operating satellites. We have about 100 million pieces of orbital space debris. So we need new laws. Most of that debris is created by those sort of extreme events, not by the satellite constellations. And thirdly, of course, we need remediation. And I would just highlight there that that does not necessarily necessitate satellites that remove objects. It can be through laser-based systems on the ground that navigate traffic management with medium power lasers on the ground. So there are other mechanisms, and we worked on schemes like that when we were at NASA. Anyway, I just wanted to close by saying this is not an irrelevant Z that satellites just, okay, we could hurt the space environment and we won't be able to use satellites. But it's critical because satellites play such an important role in the global economy. Obviously, I think often people undervalue how much space is taking part in our global economy, but also how it's providing critical services, GPS, communications, and now and increasingly our understanding of the challenges on the Earth. We needed to go up to help get a vantage point to help us with the critical challenges of climate change on the Earth. This is not a side matter. We have to deal with it correctly because of the criticality of space for the Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Will, and thank you also for underlining the importance of having law-based rules to accommodate these initiatives to clean up outer space or to keep outer space accessible. That is indeed important. It is also not so easy, as we all know, but it's good to say it. And I think also what you said about the awareness of the civil society, of the community, about the strategic importance of space is something that is not always underlined enough. And so we all have a responsibility to create that awareness and to make people realize how dependent we are on outer space, and that is not just states as actors, but it is also us citizens. So that's very important. I agree. Lastly, I'm going, but not least, and I think it's already quite late for him back in China, I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Dr. Zhong Qing, who is Chief Engineer and Vice President of CGSTL, which is a Chinese company specializing in remote sensing satellite, the first commercial remote sensing satellite company in China. And we're very excited to have you on board for this Net Zero Space initiative, and look forward to hearing your thoughts about this initiative and what your special commitment is to by signing this declaration. Dr. Zhong Qing, you have the floor. though I think we may have a frozen image.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Are you back, Dr. Zhongjing?
Yeah,
I think I hear
I'm
him.
here.
Yes. Do you hear us? Maybe while we try to re-establish the connection, I will just say a few words about my own institution that is also a signatory to the initiative, which is an education institution. So it's very different from the satellite operators and those who want to clean up space and the launch companies and so on. This is a university institute which is educating students in the field of air and space law. And I believe that that is also important and also a commitment that we can amplify. And so you're back. And so we are educating students in the field of space law and policy and facilitating their research in those legal aspects that were also referred to earlier. But I see that Dr. Zhongxing is back with us, so I would gladly give you the floor.
Yeah. Thanks, Mrs. Tanja. Sorry for my bad signal. Yeah. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I am very honored to join in the Net Zero Space Initiative. Together with so many excellent space companies and entities worldwide, CGSTO is the first Chinese commercial space company with all industry chain capabilities. Although it was established in 2014, it's very young. We are working on building the Jilin-1 constellation and have launched 31 satellites, owning the biggest commercial remote sensing constellation in China. We fully agree that as human space activities have entered a new era of great development, human dependence on Earth orbit space will also increase. As the number of spacecraft in orbit increasing, the potential space debris problem will become more serious, affecting the safety of valuable assets in orbit. Therefore, maintaining the sustainability of space is a common responsibility and obligation of all mankind. The China National Space Administration has done a lot of work on space debris mitigation and is also actively formulating more and more management on this. For every space company in China, all launch activities must be carried out on the premise of strictly meeting the requirements of debris mitigation. For example, for us, CGSTL, all of the launched satellites should have certain collision avoidance and orbital control capabilities. Satellites should have the necessary capabilities to facilitate deorbiting. Releasing of any additional object is strictly not allowed during entry into orbit. A space debris mitigation plan should be developed before applying for launch permit and will be reviewed carefully. Any spacecraft that does not meet the conditions will absolutely not be allowed to be launched. CGSTL is currently a leading commercial space company in China. It has always strictly complied with the requirements of China's space authorities and fully taken necessary measures to meet the requirements of space debris mitigation in satellite manufacturing and constellation operation. We think it is of great significance to have a good and safe space environment for the development of space industry. Therefore, we are very willing to participate in such an initiative and pledge to all parties that we will continue to take measures to contribute to the space debris mitigation. Let our universe truly benefit mankind and make our life better. I wish this initiative a complete success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and very interesting to hear of all the very concrete measures that are being followed in China for your satellites. That's very good to hear. We're going to go to some discussion format, and I see already some questions coming in on my tablet here, so please do not hesitate to ask your questions there. We will try to take up as many as possible as we have in the about half hour remaining. But perhaps to start, Mr. Azibert, with you, we've heard a lot about all these large constellations coming up in space, large numbers of satellites that are going to be launched. Could you explain a little bit, give us a high-level view of the quantitative aspects of this? How does all this use of space evolve, and what are the accelerating factors of these mega constellations? Could you enlighten us?
Sure. So I'll try to do it briefly. So first of all, Eutelsat, to position ourselves, we operate communication satellites, a geo fleet of 38 satellites, but we also a shareholder of a constellation called OneWeb, which is one of the two constellations about to start services in the next few months. With 650 satellites, around 650 satellites to be launched in low Earth orbit. So just to give the figures, currently you have something like 5,000 active satellites, about 3,000 inactive satellites, but still in space, not reorbited or not down to Earth. You have, as it was said before, about 36,000 objects of more than 10 centimeters. These are the objects which are in the catalog. And this is growing and growing. And these objects come from fragmentation or from collision, initially mostly from fragmentation. But of course, a collision can be dramatic in terms of a number of objects. And in terms of mass, you have approximately a global mass which is in the range of 10,000 tons, I guess, of total objects, satellites and debris. And the risk is that this mass, this at inception, can now, of course, be much bigger with the mega constellations. Just to give a figure, a mega constellation like the one that Starlink is planning to launch, initially with 12,000 satellites and a request to have 30,000 more, that would represent approximately 1/2 of the total mass that I'm mentioning. And of course, that's just before any production of debris, just the mass of the satellites. The same I've heard like last week about a person very famous in the industry promoting a project where there would be 300,000 satellites of a smaller mass, of course, but still, I mean, we're going to a great congestion, and we need, I think, to make sure that we are responsible in the way we address that. It's not a Malthusian policy that we need. We don't need to stop, of course, innovation and creativity, but we need to have some kind of cost benefits and sort of balance when we see these projects coming, because removing the debris will be great, and Astroscale is doing a great job in having solutions for that, but we need to contain a little bit the mass of what's going on. So these are the order of magnitudes of what we have.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. That's very helpful in trying to image this thing. And if you indeed look at the numbers, it's really staggering as compared to what is currently in orbit in terms of active satellites. And Will, circling back to you, you mentioned something that was important in your view, namely that we should get states to stop doing anti-satellite tests. Just a few days ago, we saw a news item that there was the International Space Station had been adjusted to avoid a collision with a piece of debris of the ASAT test in 2007 by China, which is nearly 15 years ago. So 15 years later, there are still risks being posed by the pieces of debris. Now, there has been an initiative from an institute in Canada that has written an open letter to the UN Security Secretary General to come to a ban on anti-satellite weapons. Do you think that would be a solution, or should we look at political pressure, or do you think this is really one of the major causes that we should look at to solve?
Absolutely. We have to solve this challenge. In fact, not only, as you said, the ISS, International Space Station, was maneuvered for the Chinese debris. We also saw it maneuvered for the US debris from their ASAT. We are endangering our own operations by this, so it's not acceptable to do kinetic anti-satellite weapons or tests, as they're sometimes called. It is critical that we ban them, and I think the only way to do so is a legal ban, because we've seen that statements of saying we encourage actors not to, and things like this, or rules of the road, are insufficient for stopping countries from doing this. We need a law so that it has teeth.
Thank you. And Simonetta, would you like to share your thoughts about this? Is this an action that is hopeful, that could have success? Do you see UN COPOS looking at this, or would it be rather the Conference on Disarmament or the UN, the General Assembly that would take action on this? Or can COPOS help in creating binding rules on the creation of space debris? What is your insight in this?
Well, this is not an easy issue, because there are a lot of competing interests, even if also what we are discussing here and the participants in this panel clearly show that there is a common interest from all the stakeholders, so NGOs, the civil society, space agencies, governments, private sector, really try to work together to find a solution. And clearly, one of the solutions should be to have, as was mentioned several times, clear rule of the roads, or rule of the orbits, and also what we call global governance. It's not easy. The long-term sustainability guidelines, as I was mentioning, approved 2 years ago by the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, are showing a certain interest from member states in going in the right direction. Probably we should find a way of, how can I say, speeding up a little bit the process. And in this respect, I would like to mention that on the 10th of September this year, the UN Secretary General issued a report called Our Common Agenda. And I would like to you focus your attention on the fact that in one paragraph, which is probably the most important one, we're talking about, he is proposing to host a summit of the future, which will take place in September 2023 in conjunction with the high-level week of the GA in New York. And if you read the 7 high-level tracks that have been included in this summit of the future, space is one of them, and in particular, it is addressing space traffic management and global governance. Well, 2023 is tomorrow, and which means that we really have an opportunity all together, the space community, to engage in this multi-stakeholder dialogue and try to use this potential, let's say, deadline or milestone to advance in this. But it depends on all of us. So we really have to work all together and trying to, find the best possible solution or compromise, which will be able to take into consideration the various instances, the various requirements, but I'm sure that the willingness is there.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Simonetta. And Mr. Zhongxing, I have a question here. How should governments regulate the introduction of new satellites and the modern-day private sector space race? Of course, we have the question that we need more regulation. On the one hand, we could expect states to play a role in there. On the other hand, we can also perhaps expect some specific behavior on the part of the operators of the large constellations. What is your view on how we should approach this problem?
Yeah, in my opinion, if space and the satellites are compared to a natural ecosystem, then the ecosystem's prosperity should depend on the co-development of different kinds of satellites. If a single species multiplies too quickly, it can upset the balance of the ecosystem. Huge constellations might also damage the satellite industry tomorrow, because there are also many other kinds of satellites needed to be sent into space. But now, this satellite is likely to be challenged by huge constellations, especially in the selection of orbital positions and the use of radio frequency resources. Furthermore, if giant constellations are accompanied by an increase in debris, the problems will be more severe than traditional constellations. So I think operators of giant constellations should take more responsibility and take more measures to actually reduce debris production, such as carrying anti-collision systems, which may become standard or mandatory for them. At the same time, the responsibility of the government supervision department is not only to strengthen the approval of launch activities, but also to monitor the in-orbit operation status, health status, and orbital changes of the satellites in such constellation and forecast the risks to the public. That is, to carry out the practical management of the whole life cycle. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Very true. We saw also a question coming up about the timeline of this Net Zero Space Initiative. What are the concrete plans? If you read the declaration, which will be published right after this session, there is a strong commitment to not wait and to start already now as of 2021 onwards to contain and then reduce the ongoing pollution of the Earth's environment by, first of all, avoiding further generation of hazardous space debris, and then by remediating existing hazardous space debris. But perhaps, Chris, you could tell us a little bit about the timeline of Astroscale. We know, of course, about the exciting ELSA-D mission, but what are the prospects of really moving forward with the remediation part, the cleaning up part? When do you think your business will be fully operational, or is that a difficult question to answer?
Of course, it's a difficult question to answer, but isn't that why we're here, to ask and answer the difficult questions? Yeah, so we're starting right now. We're starting with the testing, as I said, with ELSA-D right now, and we're encouraged to see that that companies are addressing this as well. Obviously, all of those on the panel with the efforts that they're taking to reduce and mitigate the potential for debris. And then we see some, like Michelle mentioned, OneWeb. OneWeb is putting on a docking plate on all of their satellites so that they can be docked with and removed in the future if there's a problem. So we see that companies are addressing it, they're recognizing it, and we see that the business case is growing. So the Astroscale has been around since 2013, and when the company started, there weren't really any other companies out there focused on satellite servicing and debris removal. We see so many now. And this, I think, I am going to answer your question, Tanja, but this is, I think, a sign of the growing market itself. The fact that there's so many other companies out there, and there's a lot of competitors for us now, which is a positive thing. And you can look at a group, we're active in a group called Confers, which is based in the US, but focused on developing standards and best practices for satellite servicing. And I'm the chair of Confers this year. When Confers started 3 years ago, there were five companies in there. Now there's 55. If that's not a sign that, and Confers, the whole reason for it is to focus on satellite servicing, and there's a lot of focus on sustainability and developing best practices and standards. These are all companies that are focused on those things. So the market is coming. It's definitely coming. And what we see is that we have our ELSA-D mission now. We've got a mission with the Japan Space Agency, JAXA, in about a year and a half that we're going to be characterizing an upper stage rocket body of JAXA's. We're working with OneWeb and the UK Space Agency and ESA on planning some potential missions in the mid part of this decade. We recently We're one of the awardees of a UK space agency study phase for removing a piece of UK debris. We are actively developing the capabilities and finding the customers that are going to be willing to commit to this. By the end of this decade, we see that this is going to be a common service. Debris removal, satellite servicing. It won't be something where there's a big article or newspaper report about a test in orbit. It'll be commonplace. So we see it coming quickly.
Thank you. That's very exciting. And by the way, it's also not only about repairing and removing, but we also have companies that are suggesting refueling. So having a gas station in low Earth orbit or even in lunar orbit to refuel satellites so that they can also continue to function. That will all be becoming commonplace. And well, you mentioned difficult questions. Let me ask a difficult question that's coming here for Michel Azibert about, maybe difficult, maybe not, about OneWeb. Does Eutelsat's commitment to the Net Zero Space Initiative include any specific actions by OneWeb?
Well, OneWeb is an independent company, but we are one of the main shareholders. So we trust that obviously OneWeb, by the way, continuing on what has been done before, they have recently signed a statement from the World Economic Forum on space debris. They're working with, as it was mentioned, with Astroscale to develop specific equipment on their satellites. So I have no doubt that they will join us and that they will, of course, sign the declaration in the next few weeks or months. I must say that the way they envisage their contribution to sustainability of space is quite strong. It comes from all the shareholders, not only us, but also the main Indian shareholder. And I think they are creating a direction that should be followed by the other big ones. I think the risk that I see is some of the big players right now are more in a Far West mode than we are, than OneWeb is, and we should maybe be sure that in the future there would be commitments taken by all these big players, and there would be also maybe investments, as our Chinese colleague mentioned, to develop equipment anti-collision or to be rescue friendly. And again, OneWeb is probably showing the right way.
Thank you. And we have seen, and we've been hearing that in the past hour several times, we've seen several initiatives coming up from industry itself, which really underlines the fact that industry is conscious. And of course, we should not try to stop innovation or to stop the use of outer space for all these purposes: communication, navigation, Earth observation, which are of vital importance to our planet. So stopping that is not an option and should not be our goal, but regulating it and making it, doing it in a responsible way is important. And of course, we have our initiative today, but we also see other initiatives coming up. And I want to mention perhaps one in particular by the World Economic Forum, because two of our panelists, both Astroscale and Planet, have signed up to that, which was, I think, launched last month, the Space Industry Debris Statement, I think it's called. Would any of you like to explain? Is that complementary? Is it different to this one? Do you use any opportunity that comes to really make that statement that it is something that is important to you? Will, would you like to comment?
Yeah, certainly, it's very complementary. It's very synergistic with this announcement here today. So it similarly calls for the long-term sustainability of space. We have a number of actors that are taking part in that, and yeah, I mean, we do jump on every opportunity because I think more needs to be done. As I said, there's still regulation in order, and just to comment on the previous panelist's point about OneWeb. I mean, I do think we have to be a little bit more cautious than we are currently being, because The OneWeb constellation is being launched, as I understand, into a 1,200-kilometer orbit, which unfortunately is really quite challenging when you put up hundreds of satellites into that orbit, because even if 1 in 100 propulsion systems fail, you have a lot of new satellites that are permanent or very, very long-term debris challenges for the community. I think we have to do something more than that, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, whether it's redundant propulsion systems or other things. So we've got a long way to go on mega constellations, as well as on other issues like the ASATs and others that will surely arise. So yeah, we double down on every opportunity to push for a greater efforts in these areas.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to add something, or does that
well, as far as
translate the same?
About the West statement, fully agree with Will. I mean, we're fully on board, and these are complementary, and we also look for every opportunity to highlight how important it is. I would add on the OneWeb comment, 1,200 is a failure there. You're looking at centuries of having that debris in orbit. And that's why we applaud OneWeb for putting on these docking plates and preparing their satellites to be serviceable. So that is something that they're doing. That is I think going to be the next step. And what this is a kind of springboard to what will be the future of servicing writ large. So we really believe that this is a stepping stone toward more capabilities in servicing that go not just in LEO, but up to the GEO belt as well. And we're developing capabilities for that as well. So we'd like to look at servicing writ large as a next step in ensuring sustainability.
Absolutely. And so, yes, there are, of course, technical solutions, things that we can build into the new satellites that are to be launched so that we can more easily grab them to bring them back and so on. Also, I hear often from the insurance industry, for instance, the need to add tracking devices to satellites so that we know where they are. And that is, of course, also something that is important. According to the UN space treaties, it is obliged to register satellites. But as Simonetta Di Pippo can perhaps explain, this is something that could really be improved, this system of registration. And if we would have better mechanisms to know what is up there, that would also give us a better situational awareness. I see that our time is running really quickly, so perhaps I'm going to do a last round around all the panelists to see if they have maybe a final statement that they would like to leave us with. And maybe I start again with Simonetta. Would you like to say something to conclude the session?
Yeah, thank you, Tanja, and thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. Just one comment on the World Economic Forum. Well, currently I'm co-chairing the Global Future Council on space, and we are trying every term to, to tackle one of the issues. And in reality, a couple of years ago, we started this SSR, the Space Sustainability Rating, which is another initiative, different from the one we are discussing here, but still converging toward the same goal, which is what I was mentioning before. The fact that I fully convinced that member states to take the best informed decision possible under the umbrella of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And by the way, this year, as you know, we reached 100 member states. We have 2 additional applications already presented, so officially presented. And just a few years ago, at least when I took up duty as director of the office a few years ago, we had 76 member states, which means that there is a growing interest and growing awareness of member states that they need to discuss these topics in a multilateral framework, which is exactly the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. But on the other side, as I was mentioning, I'm fully convinced that we really have to engage in this discussion all the stakeholders. As again, allow me to repeat, the private sector, space agencies, government, academia, NGOs, the civil society in general. That's the only way to be able to really have an engagement from all the partners and trying to put together several initiatives which at the very end have the same goal. So I'm quite confident that we are on the right track. My only comment is let's try to speed up a little bit the process.
That's a good message, I think. Let's try to speed it up, and let's also try to bring initiatives like this to UN COPOS to make them aware. We have several space agencies that are involved in the initiative and that can help pass on the message. I think that would also help speed it up. Michel, would you like to give us a final thought before we close?
Yeah, first, just coming 1 second back to the LEO question. I think the LEO is a big problem. Not to say that we shouldn't do what we've been doing in GEO, but just to give an order of magnitude, the density of objects in the LEO orbit is about 30 times bigger than in GEO. There are 15 times more objects, and the volume is 2 times lower. And the problem is everywhere. It's in the higher LEO orbit of like OneWeb, as mentioned by Will, because the re-entry obviously is more difficult. But then in the lower orbits of the LEO, you have a density which is extremely strong, as evidenced, for instance, last year when there was this controversy between NASA and one satellite operator, which I would not mention, but having very big satellites, and the density problem is very stringent. Now, one last word on the today is a fantastic start. I think it's fantastic because we bring all opinions to converge to this goal of sustainability by 2030. My wish would be that next year and the following year, when there are the other meetings, we get into, of course, something more granular, consensual, because if there is no consensus, we will go nowhere, but something more granular, both in terms of the code of conduct for individual operators, but also collectively to try and define and, if possible, quantify collectively the target for 2030, be it in terms of number of objects, mass, quantification of risk, I don't know, but I think we should progressively get there by modeling our future and making sure that at every point in time, every year, we control this horizon of 2030.
Absolutely, thank you. Chris, over to you. We have 1 minute each left.
Quickly, I'll just say I agree fully. Cooperation is necessary from all sectors, and it's great to see it happening at a non-space type of event like Paris Peace Forum. Get the word out. It's incumbent on all of us to make sure people are aware that this is an issue that needs addressing.
Thank you. Short and strong. Will, over to you.
Yeah, so space is critical to all of our activities here on the Earth, and so space sustainability is important and not just an academic issue. I really support what Michael said about the need for getting towards more concrete and I would say actionable steps, not just statements. And so I hope we can get there in future times. I think what we're doing today is a great step, and I do feel that great sense of cooperation among space actors to try and get this done.
Thank you so much. Dr. Zhongxing.
Yeah, today is a very good discussion, and I learned a lot. I think everyone contributes a little. There is a lot. And I believe, finally, we will realize our goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, small steps, but certain steps. I think that is important. And I agree also with what Michel said. This is only the beginning. And the Net Zero Space Initiative is also planning to have annual updates. And I'm sure that we will be back at the Paris Peace Forum to report further on the progress and the concrete actions. And it's really wonderful to see that the Paris Peace Forum has provided a forum for these discussions to take place. And we sincerely hope that there will be an increased awareness of this problem. So you will find all the announcements and the supporters, the list of the first signatories on the social media, the website, and so on. So please help us spread the word, and let's keep outer space safe and accessible and sustainable, not only for ourselves, but also for our future generations. That is really of vital interest to all of us. Thank you very much for listening. And we close the session here with